I'm here with Bernadette Jiwa, author of Hunch, Turning Your Insights, your everyday insights, into the next big thing. Very excited to meet with you today. Your book just came out, I think, yesterday. So congratulations in the US. And did it come out in the UK as well?
It came out in the UK last week.
Okay. So, my first question, which is, how do you define a hunch? And what's the difference between a hunch and just a lucky guess?
The thing about a lucky guess is it's not informed, and as I define it, a hunch is informed by something. It's something that you notice and someone just found it.
So, when you say informed by something, is it, we're thinking data, or are we thinking you notice a pattern? I mean, how strict are you about what that thing is? Is it like, oh, I noticed that, how anecdotal versus how data-driven?
The thing is about data, it's not just something that we can graph or measure. So data, data's in a smile, data's in the stories that you hear in the street.
Okay.
So it's understanding, it's actually recognizing a pattern with some practice. So asking great questions and seeing those patterns.
I find that really interesting because I feel like a long-going conversation with an old friend of mine about intuition, the power of intuition, the value of intuition, because I'm ambivalent about intuition, and that I'm sort of a reluctant champion of it, and that rationally I like to discredit it and say, oh, it's just, but anecdotally I find that when I listen to my intuition, more often than not, it's right, especially around interpersonal things, when you get that feeling, or you think, I think this path is the way to go, and but you can't exactly put your finger on why until after the fact. So intuition, though, is it just a kind of, because this is part of my conversation with her, is it just a kind of sort of human pattern recognition? Like on an intuitive level, like your mind is kind of crunching away, almost like an app going on in the background if your brain's a computer, and you know that you're just drawing these rules, but you don't see what's happening? It's
an understanding that you develop unconsciously. I love the example that Daniel Kahneman gives, where he says, when I call my wife and she picks up the phone, I can tell what her mood is just by the way she says hello, right? So he's obviously spent a lot of time understanding how she operates, and that's pattern recognition.
Sure.
And what's also interesting is that he and Amos Tversky, who he did a lot of research with into decision making and the flaws in our intuition in decision making, which I think is what you're referring to, is intuition is flawed, can be flawed, and also marvelous.
Right.
And what's interesting to me is that even people like him, who are scientists whose job it is to find proofs, start with a hunch. They start not knowing for sure if they're on the right track.
Right.
And what I loved about, when I was doing the research for the book, what I loved was finding lots of quotes from people like Stephen Hawking, people you think are really rational, and Steve Jobs, who all said that intuition had played a big part in their work.
Right. And to a large degree, intuition has is connected to something like imagination, right? Because of the Einstein quote about, I think imagination is more important than knowledge.
Yeah, and the other thing, people will say, it's always just a eureka moment, like Isaac Newton sitting under the tree, and the apple falls, and then he just gets this flash of brilliant insight. And the thing about those insights is, well, that for one, that apple tree was outside his bedroom window. So I often think, how often did he look out at the apple tree? How many hours did he spend under the apple tree? He didn't just do that once.
Yeah, that's great. Stephen Johnson writes about the slow hunch.
Yes.
And you see all these examples of it in the history of innovation, right? Where someone has an idea, and then it takes 6, 7, 10 years before they put all the pieces together.
Absolutely. And where was the data for Facebook, for Google, for Airbnb? Lots of people passed on that. So many. That's one of the stories of the book. So many great experienced VCs passed up on it and lost a lot of money as a result.
It does seem like the history of inventions are the history of sort of embarrassing passes on great ideas. I didn't see it.
Yeah.
So in sort of direct contradiction to the slow hunch, you have techniques to sort of not accelerate, but to progress your hunches along. And I thought that was a great part of the book because it was very, very practical. So how did you develop that system?
It's very so I was just talking to you before we came on. It's very deliberate that I want these books to be short and insightful and very actionable. So all of my books are like that. And how I developed it was by deconstructing what people who have been very successful in bringing products and services to market without knowing for sure, without data. People like the Dollar Shave Club guys, people like Debbie Sterling who invented Goldilocks.
Sure. Spanx.
And Spanx as well, Sarah Blakely, all intuition-driven innovations, you know. And Sarah Blakely, the inventor of Spanx, talks all the time about trusting your gut. So deconstructing what they did and just paying attention to that. So what they do is they ask great questions. They have three attributes, these people. They're creative, they're imaginative, and they're empathetic.
Right. I think empathetic is a really interesting one because a lot of times we think about, and we can talk about sort of the genius trap, right? But you think about this person alone, always alone, sort of stewing and coming up with these brilliant ideas. But in fact, it seems like a lot of these huge breakthroughs are based on watching other people and seeing things not working for them.
Absolutely.
And saying like, oh, this person always gets upset about this. Or so it in fact is very relational. It's not just a lone person in a room being a genius.
No. Well, when you think about it, the basis of an idea that flies is an idea that gets adopted by someone who's going to use it and champion it and, you know, buy into the product or the service. So, you know, if you're not considering them, if you're not empathetic to what's bothering them, what's happening that shouldn't be, or what's not happening that should be, like Sarah Blakely did with, you know, shapewear, women's underwear.
Right. What's
happening here is that the manufacturers are not trying this stuff on real women, so and they're not speaking to real women, so they don't understand what it feels like to wear this thing and how uncomfortable it is. So empathy is a huge part of it.
And then how about imagination? Do you think imagination is just this quality that people have? Is it a skill that you can develop?
Yeah, it's a skill you can develop for sure, right? We can all be creative. You were talking to me earlier about the genius trap, and that's another thing we fall into, which is if I asked you to close your eyes and imagine a genius, I can tell. Yeah, I can tell what you're thinking.
You pretty much go straight to Einstein.
Yeah, you go to Einstein.
He owns the genius property, but or you think of, I mean, maybe I guess Picasso.
So you think of. And if you Google the word genius, that's what you'll get in Google Images. You'll get academic scrolls, you get Einstein, you'll get Steve Jobs. You'll also get Homer Simpson solving Rubik's Cubes. But you don't get somebody ordinary. And you know, that's a bit of a cop-out for us. I feel that we abdicate the responsibility. You know, we don't think that we're capable of coming up with something that's great. And we would hate. It's not a title we can own. If I called you a genius, you'd be really uncomfortable with that.
I would.
Why?
Because I feel like genius is something that you sort of earn after the fact, right? It's an identity that you assume or given. You can't call yourself a genius. That's sort of terrifying. Based on some big achievement. Right? Yeah.
So based on some big achievement, or on your IQ, or
I guess potential genius. Right?
Or you know, where you went to school, and on and on. When you think about it, though, there's genius in things like, you know, a waitress who is, you know, holding all these orders in her head, or paying attention to what different diners want, or a teacher, a really skilled teacher in a classroom of 6-year-olds, holding their attention and giving to them. So I think we've got a very narrow definition of genius, and I wanted to explode that in this book.
I do. I think fundamentally the term genius is used as one of sort of inaccessibility and exclusivity. It's one of the things that I thought was really stood out from your book was this idea that, and a lot of people write about it too, but this idea that we're always distracted by our devices, right? We're constantly scrolling through, and I know that creatively, it's true, a lot of your great ideas come when you're spacing out. And so it seems like one just basic fix for how to be more creative and imaginative is let yourself be bored sometimes. Just let your mind wander.
It's true, and you know, get away from consuming, because you can't consume and create simultaneously.
Right.
Somebody asked me in an interview last week, so what can we do about it, and how can we we've got to actually have the discipline. It's self-discipline.
Yeah.
Again, let's go back to Sarah Blakely. She tells a great story about how she extends her commute to work. She lives 5 minutes from her office, but she drops her kids to school and then she drives for 45 minutes to work.
So she can think while she's driving?
Yeah, that's her thinking time, right? Yeah. So we need that. If I don't have creative time away from other people or distractions, then I get very grumpy. And sometimes that can be doing something as, it doesn't have to be sitting, and meditating. It can be something like, go and make a pie. That's what I do. Go and make a pie in the kitchen and see what comes out.
Well, that's almost like it's like a cooking meditation.
Yeah, it is. Meditation. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's funny because this, personally, that really speaks to me because for a while I felt like I was constantly consuming. I was reading Facebook scroll, and Twitter, and news, and I was even hitting this point where I was watching TV shows, say Netflix or whatever, and it felt almost like it was an extension of work. Like, especially if you binge a series, right? It felt like a series of tasks. Like I got to watch episode 7 and 8 and 9 before the new season starts. And then I backed up, and it sounds really silly and obvious, but I said, what am I watching this TV show for? And ostensibly it's for pleasure, but somehow it's veered from pleasure into productivity, which is bizarre and really not what TV is about. TV is a diversion.
This is about habits, though, and about triggers, and actually quite clever things, that keep us. If we talk about Nir Eyal's book about Hooked, about how to build habit-forming products, so we get we are tricked into having these habits that are not helpful to us. So we need to take control and to trick ourselves, to have anchors and to create habits that are useful to us.
Have you picked up any new, especially useful habits from researching and writing the book?
I think a lot of it is discipline and anchoring too. If you think about Sarah Blakely's habit of anchoring it to a time in the day. So times in the day are some of the things you can do.
You mean you designate a specific time and say, I'm going to just sort of free-form think things up.
Yeah, and one of the great authors is Cal Newport, if you want to go dive on that deep work, his book.
Yeah, deep work.
He's written extensively on how you can create routines and habits for yourself to block out creative time instead of doing busy work that feels like work. I'm reading my emails, so I'm working. You're not actually creating.
Yeah, emails to me, I think almost everyone agrees, is a great fade out. Right? You do your email and you get to inbox 0 and you feel like a champion. And you achieve nothing.
Yeah, and then at the end of the day, you wonder why you don't have that sense of fulfillment.
Right.
You're not creative. You're not baked a pie even.
Yeah, at least if you bake a pie, that's something to show for yourself.
And so, personally, what I do is I have, my anchor is my blog, so I have to post there 3 times a week. That's my discipline.
Right.
And my friend said, Golden posts every day, and that's his discipline. That's his creative discipline. And when you have to show up, and when you've made a bargain with yourself to show up, then inspiration appears.
And you hold yourself to that.
Yeah, it's being accountable, right? And understanding that it's important, to do that, to nurture yourself.
Okay. And so from a personal angle, I'm curious, because a lot of times people write books because they've had some experience with the topic. Do you feel like you were always especially intuitive, or were you not intuitive, and so this was an attempt to kind of get in touch with your intuitive side?
I feel like I make a lot of decisions intuitively.
Okay.
A personal story, we moved, my family and I moved from the UK to Australia about 12 years ago, and I had never been to Australia.
You just went for it?
Just went for it, and did not know what was on the other side, and that's what Hunch is about,
Right.
We've tricked ourselves into thinking that because we've got data, big data, that we can mitigate risk, and uncertainty, and that we don't, we don't have to take the leap, and we have to take leaps into the unknown if we're going to create ideas, world-changing ideas.
Right, and you bring up the fact that people think, oh, it's an algorithm, so it's safe, and it won't, it's objective, but in fact, algorithms are created by people who are fallible.
Absolutely.
So we're going on this sort of false premise that an algorithm is untouchable.
And sometimes, well, the recent election results here, Brexit in the UK point to that. You know, the data said one thing, and actually the story, sometimes the data's right under our nose and we're ignoring it. You know, one of the stories that I've got related to that was just before the election, I was here in New York, and you know, everybody from Nate Silver to all the forecasters were saying Hillary was just going to win by a landslide. And my husband and I met this guy selling hats outside the Rockefeller Center. And they were emblazoned with the candidates' names, Trump or Hillary. And he said to us, Trump's going to win this election because I cannot keep these hats stocked. Okay, so he was closer to the ground. He was speaking to people. You know, he knew the stories. He knew the data in the stories.
Hat prediction.
The hat prediction. The hat count.
Right.
We should have been listening to him.
I know, that's the guy to go to.
Yeah.
I have one last question, and it's sort of a bigger sort of philosophical question to some degree, but you talk about how people very often when they make decisions, they want to make an objective decision. So they want to sort of exercise any emotional element. They want to be purely rational. But in fact, you researched it, and you said that that does not work. You can't make a decision without some sort of emotional component.
That's part of the human condition, isn't it? And that's why we spend more on lottery tickets and vegetables. It's why, despite wearing fitness trackers, we've still got an obesity problem and rising. We know what we need to do, but we're not rational. Emotion always comes into our decisions. So we should acknowledge it and celebrate it. You know? That's what makes us human.
Great. Well, thank you so much for being here today and telling me about your book.
Thanks for having me. It's been a real pleasure.
Best of luck with it.